Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. This is our concepts edition. I'm Devin Bedoni of Like & Precision.
And I'm Uriel Eisen of Austere Manufacturing.
And you hit us with the quote.
Evolution is cleverer than you are, from Leslie Orgel, a biologist. Truth. And on to the show. Now, what I really like about that one is, obviously it's relevant to biology, but in
Sure.
as it relates to this podcast, it's called Incremental. We talk about continuous improvement, and a big focus of Toyota's design methodology and kind of the whole premise of this method, if it is one method, but is taking little steps all the time, and that is how evolution functions.
Right. And trying things that are dead ends as well, which is kind of an important thing to keep in mind.
Right. And I think all of the risks of evolution apply here too, which is that you might be optimizing a really bad sort of architecture.
Right. And
so a benefit we have is sort of being able to step back and try something very new. But I guess that would be sort of like the Cambrian explosion, or what's it called? I think it was the Cambrian explosion, when there was just like a huge variety of new species and most of them died off. There's it exists in the fossil record.
Was it due to a change in conditions?
Probably. I don't know a ton about it.
Huh. I gotta look that up.
Yeah, but I just think it's it's such a good reminder to stay humble and not pretend that we can predict 100 steps out. And so when we start a design process, if you're not constantly going and checking back in, go to the Gemba or talk to your customer or, see how it is on the shop floor, that's where we run into problems of just spending too much time kind of in la la land, straight theory. And then, I think it's just the better result is the person who tries 100 versions instead of the person who spends all that time designing the ultimate version, quote unquote.
Right. Yeah. I think it's also cool because, what I kind of came away from that with was being it's okay to, if you're going to do a bunch of little experiments, it's really okay to be okay, we're going to to use an evolution thing, we're going to be we're going to make one bird red and we're going to make one bird green. One of them's maybe going to die, or actually both of them might be great, but there's no harm in this little side experiment. We're going to make one bird black. It's probably not going to work, but who knows? Because evolution,
right. And sort of see where it fits in, running those experiments instead of assuming ahead of time.
Yeah. It gives you freedom to be this might suck, but also we might find out that this blackbird hunts at night, kind of thing.
Yeah, I actually had that with a vacuum mount I made. Our vacuum fell over and broke. I glued it back together, but then I was kind of root cause analysis. This has nowhere to live, and so it just gets propped on things. So I made V1 was just this honking monstrosity that took 6 hours to print on the 3D printer, and then I put it up I came in the morning, took it off the 3D printer, stuck the vacuum in it, started figuring out where I was going to hang it. And then I realized that it protruded off the wall a really long ways. It was just really big. Yeah. And then Sam and I were kind of playing with it. And then it became very obvious that if we just extended one flange a little bit and put screw holes there, we could eliminate this huge bracket that attached it to the wall and just turn the whole thing 90 degrees. And it got way simpler. And then we hung that up, and then it's not symmetrical, so you can only sort of hang it one way. And then it was in a situation where I wanted something symmetrical, and then I realized it could be even simpler and even smaller and symmetrical, and then work both directions. And it just got better and better. It sort of made me wonder, and I don't really have a conclusion on this, but whether I should have started in cardboard and just cut some things out and held them up. Because I probably would have realized a lot of this very quickly. On the other hand, I didn't spend very long in CAD. I was very kind of conscious of the fact that it might not work super well. So I just threw it together, didn't bother with all the chamfering and filleting and whatever else. I don't know. Anyway, but you can see the evolution there. And it's so valuable to do multiple versions of something instead of just like one and done.
Totally. I'm still looking up the Cambrian explosion.
Oh, I know I heard about it in, I think it was Bill Bryson's At Home, or...
So some scientists now think that a small, perhaps temporary increase in oxygen suddenly crossed an ecological threshold, enabling the emergence of predators.
Wow.
The rise of carnivory would have set off an evolutionary arms race that led to the burst of complex body types and behaviors that fill the oceans today.
Wow.
Apparently most of the major phyla came out of that.
Interesting.
This is a super tangent, but very curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of cool.
Wild.
And a lot of the things that didn't make the cut were pretty outlandish.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's kind of wild to think, like, also, like, yeah, what sort of triggered that kind of change?
And it makes me think that, like, we can sort of, in design school, I remember sort of talking about suspending disbelief, which as a
Practical
young adult
uh-huh.
or something, I was a little gung-ho on, like, why would we do that if it's unrealistic? But I think, like, if you look at the history of technology, a lot of big advancements come from sport or art, because there's no, like, in commerce, you're sort of practically minded typically. Not to say there's not huge evolution that comes out of commerce,
sure.
But I should say it's surprising how much comes from art and sport.
Yeah.
Because there it's kind of like, I want to do this, and you're like, well, that's not practical. It's like, right, I want to do it anyway. Yeah. And then people spend a huge amount of time figuring out how to do it, like building instruments and stuff like that.
Yeah, passion causes the suspension of disbelief.
A little bit, and I wonder in this example, like adding more oxygen to something. Like in the shop, you can kind of go, and this has been really useful to me to try to find what's blocking us, what's creating batches, the temptation to batch in the shop. I remember on the CNC once, I realized, like, what would happen if there was a button, every time I clicked it, it would make a different part. Right. And then what would that do to the rest of the production in the shop? And that's sort of suspending disbelief, right? But that mental exercise was really interesting to kind of realize how that would propagate through the rest of the shop. And then you kind of realize, like, oh, we can kind of actually simulate that just by having a buffer and then passing in really small batches, right?
Yeah.
And then you can sort of achieve some of the winnings downstream. Anyway, there's value, and
Interesting. Well,
you have some juicy topics in here.
All right. Just start at the top.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd put in here was the more you standardize and remove touch points, the more edge cases become major vectors for defects or problems or whatever. Bad. More major vector for bad.
This is just in theory, I'm sure.
Just in theory. Yeah. No, I never experienced this at all. It's just been interesting as we've, refined our CAM template and our corresponding. One thing that I didn't think through so much, this was a benefit, but as we refined our CAM templating, a major upside has been that because the CAM template is the same, I somehow didn't think about this at all.
The setups are also kind of the same?
The setups are the same, right? So
interesting.
Our setup times have gone down a lot, which was really cool. And but it can lull you into what's the word?
Like, you assume that everything's the same because it has been for the past 3 months. Yeah. And then when it's different, you're not checking.
Right. So when everything is different every single time, like, we're all very, very careful about checking and double checking and what was that thing and how's that aligned? And so there's been a handful of times recently where we've had to do something pretty out of the box. And I think mostly on my end, mistakes have been made where, like, just because I don't have to check that on a regular basis anymore, I completely forgot to check it at all.
What's the it in this case? Or
I think in this one example was, like, updating coordinate system positions and cam for an alternative setup, where right now that's not something I have to do at all because it's all just like preset.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, I need to work hold a little differently, but
you didn't then go like, okay, now I need to set the origin.
I wasn't like, okay, now I have to reset everything.
Interesting.
And, it wasn't a big deal. It was like nothing bad happened and we caught it. But it was just like an interesting aha moment to just realize that it's very easy to become complacent.
We have that in a pretty major way.
Yeah.
Where, I mean, we had this conversation when we launched the belt. There was a moment where we thought we'd have to do tool changes to run the different parts, and kind of, it's exactly this. It's like, if everything doesn't require a tool change,
right,
and then one part does, how do you indicate that in a reliable way? And then you have to do a tool change back. So now every other item that trails that one needs a tool change. Anyway, it's exactly that. It's like we're doing it every day exactly the same way, and it increases efficiency and sort of decreases attentiveness. I was kind of curious. Toyota puts a huge emphasis on SOPs, but I don't know. I'd be very curious. Like, we've made SOPs before, and just to be, fully transparent, they're totally worth making. But they can become stale. But sometimes they don't have to become stale for people to just, like, you stop looking at them because you know how to do it.
Yeah.
And so if you edit the SOP that doesn't actually
change anything,
change it. Yeah. Cause you're just going to do it how you did it before.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of curious. Like, I'd be very curious how they ensure, I mean, I know it's in some of the books, but I'd love to see it in practice.
Like how they create that feedback loop, as it were.
Well, my understanding is that the line manager, or whatever it's called, is in charge of making sure there's compliance to the standard. And so the standards are actually arranged to show them to the person walking by, not to the operator, which I guess sort of answers my question a little bit. It's that the operator isn't necessarily referring to them.
Right. But it requires
someone
oversight.
in the job is looking at the thing and checking if it matches. Is that happening all the time for real, or is that just what they talk about?
Yeah, or it might just be when there's an issue. Right.
I mean, they definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
It's like, did this happen because of some new thing, or was the standard not adhered to?
Right. And so that's maybe part of it is like, we have a de facto standard, having standardized, quote unquote.
Right.
But we don't actually have a standard. So there's not anything to sort of refer to and be like, is this different than what we did yesterday? Or here's the checklist. I think the knee-jerk reaction would be like, well, don't take any work that doesn't fit in your standard workflow. Right. And that is maybe a good business decision. But also, I think the longer term thing is just to be like, well, figure out how to accommodate these variations, because
and
you will.
There's oftentimes like you could. I'm just thinking out loud here, but like this is sort of where Poka-yoke comes in, where there might be a creative way to sort of automatically flag things that are not standard, right? Like the second it's like this, we do X, Y, and Z. It's a different color. It automatically does it in the computer. Step one of every program is it going to its origin to do like a visual check where the operator hits go again. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's tough. Yeah. Yeah. But that's a very good point that like, as things become standardized, it is easy for things to go off the rails. Yeah. Because the other way, things are always off the rails. So everyone's like paying attention. Right. Because there are no rails. You have to see all the time where it's going and what happens next.
Who is steering this ship?
No one. You are.
Yeah. So there was no I didn't come away from that with any like major aha moments. More like, this is a principle to keep in mind going forward when doing any kind of planning. Yeah. Because it will bite you. And that kind of like actually feeds into another point I had here, which is that all processes have variability. And then kind of a corollary being that all processes can benefit from standardization. So backing up a notch, I think right, like the knee jerk is to say, don't take things that are outside of your standard process, but sort of remembering that even within our standard workflow, there's a lot of variability.
Totally.
So it's more like figure out how to deal with variability. There's always going to be variability.
Right.
And so figuring out, what that feedback loop or whatever it is, creating that in a way that it can handle your standard quote unquote variability within your, like, in my case, templated workflow, but then also be able to handle the workflows that don't fit into the everyday.
Yeah.
But the other part of this that I was thinking about was just that in general, I think a lot of people want to apply lean principles to production style processes, versus job shop or whatever, versus bespoke processes maybe, because it seems simpler or it seems more appropriate. And I just had this thought that, like, all processes have variability. It's just a matter of degree. So
totally,
you can apply standardization, i.e. lean principles, to any process. It just requires the right lens to find what sort of the common threads are. And that's sort of, that's been sort of my project of the last going on 2 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, it is funny. We pitched Arda to a company whose pushback was basically that their production process was inherently had a long time interval kind of. And I was kind of like, you can't argue with a customer sometimes, right?
Sure.
And they're not a customer, to be clear. Like, they're like, it doesn't work. They were in agriculture, right? So you're not going to make an onion grow faster, right? It grows at a certain speed.
Yep.
I mean,
within reason.
Within reason.
You certainly can make it grow slower.
Yeah. But, like, you're not going to just in time that onion where it's like, oh, if we do one at a time, we can increase whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I was sort of sitting there being like, well, no process happens instantaneously. So really it's just a matter of degree, like you're saying, right? It's like the variable here is time to complete a cycle. And so, yes, that has knock-on effects,
right?
But that doesn't necessarily mean that, like, basically in this case, it's like push production versus pull. And if your interval is like a yearly cycle, it is very easy to fall into a plan it all out mindset because you kind of have to a little bit.
To a degree. Yeah.
Right. It's like, we want to grow this many onions because we want to sell this much onion powder.
Yeah.
Whatever. Right. Anyway, that was the pushback.
Interesting.
But it is just a matter of degree, like variability.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, I think, a good thing to keep in mind throughout everything these days is I think it's like the things that you can standardize become like more broad categories. Yeah.
I would sort of say two things. One, like, there's the classic story of Shigeo Shingo, like, automate 80%. Right. And actually we just did this with Arda of creating forwarding links. Like, every new instance has all these forwarding links. We were trying to figure out how to make a total self-serve thing, and we couldn't figure out how to get our service that provides those or that manages those to do it in an automatic way. And then Kyle was like, well, I can. He made a button that does, like, most of the work. We still have to go not physically, but we have to log in and click that button instead of doing, like, a lot of copy and pasting that's error prone and this and that. Right. So it's like, that is largely automated. And I think, like, taking a process and systemizing some component of it just opens up a lot of doors. The other piece, and I know we talked about this, at length, but I think the more I'm doing this, we start off, like, when I started off, it was definitely production focused, value add activities, shaving like a second off here and there. And then you realize it's like most of your business, unfortunately, is actually non-value add. And looking there for systemization is just so much more useful, especially because like in a high variability environment, it's actually, and I think like you were caught up in this like before you started, which was like, well, every job's different. It's like, yeah, every job is different. And if you're looking at the job, that's, I think, why people go to production stuff, because every job is the same.
Right.
But it turns out that like the process is very similar.
And that's just kind of what you have to boil it down to. Same thing. Like, I'm going to make 140,000 widget A.
Yeah.
And focus intensely on widget A. You're like, well, I'm going to make 140,000 things. And what do I do for all those things?
That are sort of common across it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it turns out quite a bit. And I suspect
almost
it's actually
everything.
Right. Yeah. Like 80-90% of the process is sort of the same.
Yeah. It's like, yes, for everything we receive an order.
Right.
For every
what is the process
order,
for receiving an order? Yeah.
We have to tell somebody about it. We have to order materials. We have to move those materials and those tools to a machine, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Like, it's all actually nearly identical with slight variations.
I mean, this reminds me of what you said last week, which is like when you're optimizing a tool path, like you, or CNC uptime, you don't start with like in cut time.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, I think most businesses are sort of hyper focused on their quote unquote in cut time. It's like if you're a bakery,
right,
you focus on like your baking.
Yeah.
But there's so much stuff that happens that's not baking.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, that's been a big, I mean, I'm biased here, but doing ARDA is definitely that, where it just feels like, talking to all these companies, it is taking up a significant portion of their team's time. Mm-hmm. They're not super aware of it because their focus is on their value add activity. So like if you're converting vans, you think hard about all the things you do to build vans.
Right.
And then you're not thinking hard about like your whole team sort of in constant firefighting mode of like, oh, we don't have this part. Okay, well, let's install this other thing today.
Or if your bathroom's like down the hall and lose a collective hour a day of people walking back and forth to a bathroom.
And no one's going like
that.
Oh, maybe let's move the bathroom. I mean, that seems absurd. There was a video I watched or an interview. Where did I listen to this? It was a company. They realized that their production floor and their offices were quite far apart and across a street. So you had to like go down the stairs, across the street, and then where was I listening? And they ended up like punching a hole in the side of the building and building a bridge across.
Oh, wow.
So instead of like a 15-minute walk, it was like a 5-minute walk. So suddenly if you had something to look at or whatever, you just would.
Right. Instead of like,
and I'm sure they spent so much money on building a bridge, which is going to show up on some piece of paper somewhere written in one place where you're like, wow, that's a huge number. But like all that labor, and actually probably worse than the wasted time of walking was the wastes generated by engineers not walking. Right.
Right. Yeah. No, that I was just thinking like assuming or waiting till they had enough of a reason to go and talk, and then a bunch of things have gone wrong, or just like creating like lengthening that feedback loop. Always bad. So I have two funny things. One is eat your own dog food. Can it just be food?
I think this actually came from a story of a company that was making pet food. I don't know. It's a term I've heard. That's why I wrote it down. But the idea is like, have you tried it? Like, have you used your thing? And the problem is like, generally no. I mean, sometimes I get emails about things on my website, and I go on the website and I'm like, wow, I haven't been on here in like months, right? I go on the back end of the website to like update photos and this and that, but I'm not like going through the process that a customer goes through. So Kyle and I started implementing cards in our homes for this reason. I mean, also just because
you're total nerds.
Yeah, there's also that. It's been really fun. But it's very interesting because as we're implementing it, like a lot of tiny little annoying things that I wouldn't have found because I'm doing every step of it. Whereas in the shop here, like Sam does a lot of it. right? Like I'm not doing every part of it. And then I see some annoying feature. The other day I was shopping in Trader Joe's and had the app open to look at the items in my cart. And then I called Kyle and I was like, hey, can we make these like, they were just, each item took up so much space on the screen that I could only see like 3 items.
So you couldn't like sort of where you were going in the store.
Yeah. I had to like do a lot of scrolling to just see everything. And then, you know, so then you're using that and started getting that feedback. Kyle, we did an install and we were laminating everything. And Kyle was kind of like, do we really need to, like, couldn't we just give them cards? And then he called me the other day, was like, so I figured out why laminating is important, because he had like a card that was in circulation for maybe a week in his house, right? Like not production, in his house. And it just got totally mangled. Yeah. And he's like, I see. Anyway. And then lastly, this is just funny. I feel like it happened to me with the buckles, where I worked on them for 6 months and bought a CNC, all with the premise that like better buckles would be really, really useful and sort of impactful. And then the first bike packing trip I took, I was like, it sort of blew my mind how much better. Like it's like, wow, this like really works. But this is kind of funny. So when we decided to implement, or when Kyle decided to implement it in his house, he'd been building it for 3 months, like every day, all day kind of thing. So like you'd think he would understand the value, and then he started implementing it and was just like within like 30 minutes was like, this is awesome. Because like just realizing that a lot of his, I mean, this sounds ridiculous applying it to a house, but a lot of the things he was doing, so he realized that a lot of the stuff he was buying at Costco could be bought online through Costco, and he doesn't have a car, so he's like hauling it in bags. So that actually does make a difference. But normally we don't proactively spend time thinking about procurement, and this applies to business, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so you're sort of in the heat of it and you're like, well, I'm just going to buy it from Amazon today because I'm already here. I'm already placed. I'm just going to do it. And then maybe next time I'll look for another source. But like somehow when you're sort of proactively assessing where you get stuff, you're in a different mindset or something. I don't know. Like also finding other vendors. So he found out that, or just realizing, looking at it, that he had a Walmart subscription through a credit card. So a lot of the stuff would get delivered for free in smaller quantities. That meant he didn't have to dedicate so much storage in the house to it. So that was funny. And then something that happened to me this week, which was excellent, is that again in the house, I ran out of brown sugar, which is funny because
there's a song about that.
This has got to be. Maggie and I had both thought we were low on brown sugar, so we both bought it a few times, and so we ended up with like 5 bags of brown sugar. And so then in our heads,
you had a ton.
We had a ton of brown sugar. So we definitely don't need brown sugar. So then we ran out. And this is so typical. Like I've been now talking to a lot of companies, I've done some installs, and this is what happens all the time is people buy a lot because they don't want to run out. But in some ways it's actually worse because you assume there's always more. Yeah. And so then people run out. And then the funniest part was I then did some expediting where I changed I was like, well, I guess I'll make something else that doesn't need brown sugar. And so figured out some other way of doing it. And then once I did that, I was cooking some other stuff, and then I found more brown sugar that was somewhere else because it wouldn't fit in the typical brown sugar spot. So this is all like just straight off the production floor, exactly why like having a plan for procurement and for the parts in the shop just makes a huge, like, I don't know, it just saves so much time. Something I've been thinking a lot about in the shop is like the feeling of being sort of like creative problem solving is a good feeling. And I think what happens in a lot of businesses, including mine, is it's very easy for that to be applied to really dumb stuff. Yeah. Right? Like procurement, for example, where you're kind of like shopping around for deals, or you get a big batch of, you place a big order because there's a price break, and then it comes into the shop and it doesn't all fit on the one shelf. So then you're like shuffling stuff around, and that feels like you're solving a problem, but it's actually just a really dumb problem to solve. And you should go solve like a real problem, that actually has impact for the business.
Right.
It's kind of interesting because I just feel like it's a bad test of how, like, I know we've talked about this on the podcast, but people self-report that 85% of their work is creative and value add, and it's typically 15. But I think the thing that they're actually reporting is not, was it value add and creative? I suspect we sort of gauge our day by like how, I think when stuff starts feeling monotonous, it feels not valuable. Like almost like you being a human isn't worth much. Like if you sit there throwing a lever back and forth, right? Like if the light turns red, flip it this way. If the light turns green, flip it this way. And then you ask someone at the end of the day, like how much of that work was like value add. I think people would be like none. But then if you abstract that into like, well, when you get an email that says X, Y, and Z, you're going to go over to this thing and you're going to do this. But every time you do it, you have to sort of figure out where exactly to do it because of all these other, then it feels creative.
Right.
There's a game I played and I played it for hours. It was very compelling. But at the end, my conclusion was that it was like war for adults.
Like the card game war.
The card game war, which is really like little kids enjoy it, and then at some age you're like, this is so dumb.
So dumb. Yeah.
But this other game was basically a very similar mechanism, but abstracted enough where it felt more interesting, but it was very misleading. And I think a state of chaos in your business feels very like you can feel very valuable, even if you're driving very little value.
Right. Yeah. It's like you're in a car going like 2 miles an hour, but there's like you're on a extremely potholed road with washboard, and so it feels like you have to work really hard to stay on the road.
Like you're steering around all the potholes. It's great. You feel like
but you're getting nowhere.
You're getting nowhere, and you'd be much better off to like stop the car and fix a little bit of the road every day. Yeah, you're breaking your car. Yeah. Tricky. I think I talked about this, but PFEP, plan for every part. So I've been doing a little more research. We also built out a whole section of ARDA to accommodate this aspect of things. But in doing it, we've experienced a very interesting, and I think this exists in the shop just generally, but there's a constant pull toward complexity, I feel like. Where either a customer, or that can be an internal customer, external, is sort of asking for more options and more variability, and like, oh, but what about this edge case? What about that edge case? And
refinement, basically.
Yeah, or just like, I don't know, or can it have this feature? Can you do it where, I don't know. Like, I think there's just a constant pull toward like more complexity. We've gotten this a lot, and it's really hard and really important to make sure that stuff stays really simple. And I feel like a lot of the improvement process and a lot of what Toyota does sort of recognizes that, where like they have that whole mechanical assembly line, right? Where they don't use any motors or any actuation. Because it often drives really simple solutions. And I know I've done this where I've come up with some like really fancy jig that does something, very cool. And then I realized like, oh, I could also just do it a different way and achieve the same thing. And it's really, really simple. Anyway, I think it's kind of an interesting layer to add to the problem solving, like process.
Right.
To just, again, I think this again sort of removes certainty around your current version, like adds the assumption that you are wrong and that you need to get the thing done so that you can test it and figure out why it's wrong. And I think like the simplicity, like things tend to start off really complicated and then simplify over time and get much better over time. Like I was talking about the vacuum mount. Like I just feel like that happens all the time. Like once you see it, you're like, oh, we can get rid of this, we can get rid of that. But that takes, there's a saying like if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. Yeah. It's kind of that. It like takes a lot to make things simple.
Yeah.
And things tend to be, I think there's a constant like pull toward complexity, and it takes a lot of thought and attention and trial to get it to simplify again.
Right. And I think there's a good reason too, which is like complex systems are more prone to break.
There's a good reason for what?
For putting in the effort to make it simple. Or to just like, I think there's like, things tend toward complexity, but also like people tend to sort of like want complexity. And I'm thinking more in like organizational systems, right? Like we have a very strong pull to be like, well, I want to know exactly the thing, and I want to know exactly where it is, and I want to know,
right,
you know, exactly when we need it and all that
like
stuff.
all the data.
Yeah. And I think that's also true, like in a production system, people are like, well, why don't we just do it where I don't have to touch anything? And you have like servos that do this and do that and do this and do that. And sort of coming back to the 80% solution, I think if you back up for a second, you're like, okay, well, we could do that, but the likelihood that it's going to break is pretty high. Or we could do this where you use your hands to hold it in place, and then 80% of it gets done automatically. But the likelihood that it's going to break is nearly zero. That is worthwhile. I had another note in here on this topic that was unreliable data is almost worse than nothing. I think I would actually, like, having read it back, I would delete the almost.
Yeah, probably.
I think it is worse than nothing.
Yeah.
Sort of similar to what we were talking about earlier, where
you don't bother checking because there's data there, even, right?
Yes, sort of. Or basically like, you don't bother checking because there's data, but also you don't use it because it's broken, and so now there's just like a big hole in the system.
Was this by any chance a specific?
I don't think so. I don't remember what brought this up.
Okay.
There must have been something that jogged my memory, but I can't remember what it is now. But I think that's similar, like in information stuff, is like keep it as simple as possible so that it doesn't break.
Yeah, we actually eliminated our QC data collection like a month ago because we've been running for 3 years. We've probably been running with data collection for 2 years. I've looked at it twice, and it takes us, it takes some time. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, why would we want to look at it retro like that? I mean, in terms of shortening up those loops, right?
Right.
Like the feedback loop, why don't we look at every day, look at the stuff? And the way we simplified it is if we actually just empty all of the bins at the same time of our different categories, the buildup in those bins tells you about the relative importance of different reject types.
These are reject bins?
Yeah. We have them classified into different like machining rejects.
Okay. So you're still collecting data.
Yeah, but without like scanning fancy barcodes and feeling like technologically advanced. It's very
like throw them in the correct bucket and then see which buckets are full.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you
it was kind of crazy.
I love it because like, that's all the computer is doing, right? It's like putting the information in a bucket.
Yeah, and to do it, we like came up with this really clever like barcode method to do it really fast because we used to type it in with a keyboard. Anyway, out with all that.
I love this.
Yeah.
I mean, so like that that barcode method would work really well if like you're across an entire a production plant that's acres big.
I don't.
Right?
Yes, it works well at doing a stupid thing, which is like this is I think where Toyota's distrust of computers comes from.
Yeah.
The person painting, who's presumably close to the QC, needs to look at those buckets. Like, why does some like CFO somewhere need to see those numbers? I mean, a lot of companies want to see those numbers because there's no continuous improvement process that's built into the organization across every level.
Yeah.
That's the only reason. Then it's like someone comes into a boardroom and gets yelled at because the numbers are too high.
Right. Well, what I was going to say is like it starts to become an issue if there's buckets scattered all around the facility, but also counter to that, you have more granular data if you just look at each individual bucket. And so if you're like, instead of being like, right,
like where exactly is that type of reject coming from in the factory, not just cumulatively.
Because if you did just have a computer, theoretically, you could probably scan it to like where it happened. But also you could be like, well, when Bob's here on Thursdays at station 6, that bucket gets full. Let's figure out what's different about what Bob's doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it can feel comforting to... There's something that is weird about QC and data, which can sometimes start to feel like a blame game. Mm-hmm. It's sort of trying to figure out, if you get called in by your boss and they're like, the quality is X, you want to have a spiffy answer. That's like, we have the fanciest system. Oh, isn't there an example of this is it the Toyota Way? There's I forget which book it is. There's a hospital where they had 2 babies turn blue in a month. And there wasn't someone at the bedside within, I forget, the goal is under 3 minutes, I want to say, and it was over 3 minutes.
Okay.
Huge investigation. I mean, big problem, right? Yeah. And then they got in a boardroom with the head of IT, the head of this, and that. It was like a $5 million system that sent an alarm to say like the baby is probably blue, like someone go look at the baby. And so they were about to pull the trigger on a much like the fanciest system, right? Mm-hmm. Like this way we can tell everyone nothing's wrong.
Right.
We've spared no expense. We have the best system. And one of the people in that room was just like, well, what if we just, we're trying to get to the bottom of this. What if we go to the floor where this is happening? Yeah. Just like, So they went there and talked to the nurse, and the nurse was basically like, oh yeah, well, whenever those alarms go off, we just like clear the alarm. And they're like, well, why? She was like, well, they're always going off. Like they go off all the time. And they're like, well, why are they going off all the time? So it turned out that the sensors for sticking to a baby, there were actually a different sensor for that because they roll around a lot more. And so they tend to fall off. And so they ended up buying a new sensor from the company. Because when the sensor fell off, it showed the same kind of whatever.
No heartbeat.
Whatever it is. So it was kind of like by going there and seeing the thing. So I guess back to the QC question, I think a digital system in everyone's head is like, oh, we have a very advanced, like buckets sounds pretty Stone Age. Yeah. And so you might go like, maybe we should upgrade and have analytics and a dashboard. And that sounds like you're taking QC seriously, but really you're sort of like creating a new project that has nothing to do with reducing rejects, which is allegedly the goal. I mean, there's 2 goals of QC, right? One is proactive and one is kind of like, I guess one is QC. Yeah. There's quality assurance and quality control. But what you're doing with that data, there's 2 sort of paths for that to go, of like making sure you don't ship bad stuff, but the other, hopefully, and most companies don't have this, the other is kind of like,
how do we
root cause analysis? Let's get rid of it. Anyway.
Interesting. That, I just love that. I had a interesting conversation with a friend the other day. We're working on kind of like a joint work sharing agreement. Like we have very different equipment.
Oh, cool.
And occasionally, they get work that's not a good fit for them that would be a good fit for us. And recently we've had to no quote a lot of stuff that wouldn't fit on our equipment, but would fit on there. So we're kind of like, instead of we're working on an agreement, instead of being like, hey, I have this thing, do you want to quote it? And like making it a whole rigmarole and additional administrative overhead, but lower profit. The
quote would come from you or something, or
right. Now it's going to be like, I'm going to quote this at this price. We have like an established agreement for like profit sharing. Yeah. And it's just like a simple yes, no, like an established agreement for like all of like who sources what, so that it's not like extra work for anybody.
Yeah. That's clever.
Hopefully. Well, we haven't tried it yet.
That's creative. We'll start there.
Anyway, I called them up and I was like, hey, we have some capacity coming up in like a week. And they're like, wow, it's really cool that you know that you have capacity coming up. And I was like, well, how's your scheduling system? They use a well-established ERP
Okay.
who will remain nameless.
Uh-huh.
And they're like, well, I mean, in theory it would work, but it doesn't, because it doesn't like accurately reflect our, you know, our situation on the floor, as it were.
Uh-huh.
Right? Like there's all this theoretical time allotted for each job, for each machine.
Right.
But it's all, there's so many assumptions built in that it's effectively just garbage data.
And how does yours work?
Well, mine is more of like a pull system. So,
say more. No.
So it is not as accurate, perhaps.
Theoretically.
It's not as theoretically accurate.
Right.
Like it's more big picture.
Yeah.
But it's based on actual demand, I think. It would be the difference, maybe. It's not attempting to be forward looking. We just see like demand has pulled through this far in the process. We're expected to have a hole here in 1 to 2 weeks. Right?
So this is like on your job board, if you're not seeing stuff that you should be programming, if you don't see a queue there, you know you're going to have capacity probably.
Yeah, basically. And so again, it's just like coming back to the bucket versus
cool.
the barcodes. It's
Right.
kind of like,
Yeah.
we're not trying to be as granular. We've really dumbed it down. It's sort of like the bucket
To the point where it
ERP.
actually works.
But it is functioning pretty well.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. On that topic. Ooh, sorry. On that topic, I talked to a major bike brand about buckles actually, but the conversation of ERP came up, and they are having significant costs related to basically managing the ERP.
Yeah.
So it's making their assembly costs high.
Oh, interesting.
And so what they're looking at is possibly doing a pull system for the shop floor, because the ERP makes it all the way down onto the shop floor, which oftentimes I think it shouldn't. I mean, it depends, right? But like for them, it's actually just creating a ton of work that doesn't help anyone because it's often not even correct.
Yeah.
And so instead you can sort of draw a line at your warehouse. And it's actually, so the reason we're building the PFEP stuff is because it turns out a lot of like second tier suppliers to auto use, you know, the two big ERPs, SAP and Oracle. And it's so cumbersome that, I mean, it's so powerful, but it's also so cumbersome that often their IT department can't really improve it or fit it to their needs. And so it just ends up clogging up the works. And so a lot of people use a Kanban system to pull from supermarkets that supply line side.
Yeah.
There's issues with that. Most of them are run basically with paper off of a spreadsheet. And so by digitizing it to some degree, you can fix some of the issues they're having. But it's very interesting to, like, it's not a unique, it's interesting to hear. You'd expect that these problems would be solved in big like really legit companies that you've heard of.
Yeah.
And in car manufacturing and like just across the board, it's like there's these books about it. And I mean, obviously it takes a ton of work to get there, but it's just, it's great. It's kind of wild when you're like, wow, people like you calling your friend and they're like, oh yeah, we don't have this figured out, but we have like sort of the answer to it theoretically, right? Like we have a fancy ERP, right? And you're like, well, that's cool.
I think we're so focused on cost sensitivity, I think is part of it, that like it's, and letting perfect be the enemy of good.
Yes.
Where I think any rational person, if you were to say, okay, we're going to set up this system where you have extra bits sitting everywhere that you're going to pull from as needed, but they're extra bits. Or you could have this perfect system that will plan all your bits and all of your perfect bits will show up at the exact time that they're needed.
Is that the title of this episode? All your perfect bits?
The rational person will pick the latter, right?
Yes.
But the unfortunate reality is it's nearly impossible, at least at this point, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so you end up having to have all of those extra bits anyway, and then you have bad data about where everything is and when it's going to arrive.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this on the pod, but we did an install where we sort of recommended that the people keep a month of inventory because shipping times were kind of long.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's a lot of inventory. We don't really want to hold that much. And we're like, okay, but how much do you have now? And so we went around the shop and pulled it all into one pile, and they had 4 times the amount we were recommending. They just didn't know because it was all over.
Yeah. Yeah, we had that conversation about tool inventory recently, whether it's better to like have the added complexity of ordering the expensive tool when you need it or just having 2 anyway.
Yeah.
And that definitely has sort of become my mantra lately, is just like have the 2 anyway. And
yeah, it's a sore subject right now for me.
It feels more expensive.
Yeah.
And you do have to be somewhat like strategic about how you tackle it.
You don't keep a spare CNC behind each CNC, for example. That is also an expensive tool.
Yeah, there's also that.
Yeah, back to the top of the episode. It's all a matter of degree.
It's all a matter of degree, yeah. We've been, we priced out like getting 1 each. I think I mentioned 1 each of every tool that we didn't have.
Oh.
It was going to be like, this actually was only like half of 1 each. It was like one supplier, and it was going to be like, I don't know, $4,700 or something.
Ooh.
And I was like, well, that's not really the most effective way to spend our money right now.
Right.
But we do need to make this happen. So what we've been doing in our standard tooling ordering is we just like take 10 cards of what of the backlog, right? And are slowly filling it out.
Oh, nice.
Where's that going with that? Anyhow, I just think like we're really cost sensitive. It's really easy to bean count about those extra tools sitting in a drawer and forget about the administrative costs of having someone manage this crazy, theoretically perfect system.
Yeah, I was watching a video by Quantum Lean on setting up Kanban, and he was Brad was recounting a conversation of he was sitting in the office and he was like, oh, by the way, we need more Sharpies. Can you order more Sharpies? And they're like, yeah, sure. It's like, okay, how many do you want? He's like, just like 2 or 5. He's like, okay, it's cheaper actually if we buy 12. He's like, great, okay, buy 12. What color do you like there's all these questions that then happen. And I know I've done this, right? Like I bought batteries the other day.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, I could buy 2, but if I buy 5, they're barely more expensive. We only need to, like, that's all time and cost. And on something that is, you're never like, it's not value add to your customer at all, but it feels useful, I guess. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, that's all administrative cost that's very hard to see and like contemplate. And then but if some exec looks in a drawer of all your tooling, I mean, luckily you're the exec, right? They always talk in these books about like lean has to come from the top. Like,
yeah, I mean,
you are the top.
I've had friends in shops where someone came in and literally just had them throw away.
Yeah. I've heard of this too. And people hate lean because of it.
Yeah. Which, like, on the one hand, like, that is me sometimes. I'm like, that's a random thing that's not part of our standard tool library. Like, get rid of it.
Yeah.
Which, if you aren't filling it in with a functional replacement, is terrible, right? Like, if you're not being like, okay, we don't use that tool, but we're going to use this tool instead, and we're going to keep 2 on hand all the time, right? Like that. But works.
Also, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect that if someone in the shop was like, oh, wait, we actually use that all the time for this weird thing, you'd be like, oh, like, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's fix that. Let's get you the right tool. Let's whatever.
Right. But then I think there are a lot of places where an exec comes in and is like, why do we have all this extra stuff? Throw it away.
Yeah. The consultant we hired said we should only have like production related items in the shop. Yeah. I mean, I have a stack of pennies in the shop, which I think would not make the cut probably, but I use them to space the vice jaws for cutting up too, right? Like just random stuff that I have a lot of stuff that should get the axe.
Are they Kanban?
No, but they should be. I was thinking about listing them on our website for like, for like $5 for a set of shims. You just get pennies. Anyway, I haven't done it.
That'd be amazing.
We should probably wrap this up.
We should. Yep. Thanks everybody for listening. We enjoy this very much, as you can see.
Maybe too much.
You can find me on the Instagram at lichen_MFG, online at lichenprecision.com, the pod at incrementalci on Instagram.
And you can find me at austere_manufacturing, austeremfg.com. You can also find Arda at arda.cards, both on Instagram and on the internet. And we will talk to you later.
Adios.